you in?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. No, Jeff had to grab his key, so. Well, should we go ahead and, is everybody else here? Sorry about that delay.
Everyone else is here.
Okay.
We're here, Madam Chair,
Yes.
and we have management partners waiting in the waiting room when that item comes up. But we have a few items before that.
Great. Sorry to keep everybody waiting. So we'll just go ahead and call the meeting to order then. Looks like we are all here, and we'll go to communications. Anything regarding the letter from Mr. Kozlowski? Right.
I have a question on that, if I could, on his letters.
Can you bring that up, Irene? Can you bring up the recent one?
It's just kind of a generic question, Chair. Does anyone look at these letters that he sends? Is there any validity to what he's saying?
Well, I don't know if he's here to defend himself. I'm sure that he thinks that every word he writes, as all our constituents do, is vitally important. So I always make it a point of reviewing them.
As do I.
Yeah, can we bring this particular correspondence up? Irene, are you working on that?
I am working on that, yes.
Great.
So hopefully.
Well, I'm just thinking from a staff level. Does anyone look at his emails and say, yeah, he's got a point here? Or not? And I don't need an answer today, but if somebody just could get back to me and let me know.
Mayor, I can respond to your question. We do receive a fairly large volume of communications from Mr. Kozlowski on a number of topics and issues, but I do endeavor to read them all. And I did read this email. It's really an opinion-based email more than anything, and I actually do have some concerns about some of the information that he presented. He's going to suggest that it's factual, particularly, and it's really it's up to the chair and you to determine if you want to walk through these real quick, or if you just like me to opine on the one in particular.
No, and I don't expect you to do anything today. My question is simply, is staff reading these emails and letters, and are we making note of bringing up good points that we should be looking at? And this may not be a good one. I'm referring more to his energy ones that he talks about, and some of the factual information that's in those letters. So
it's kind of a mixed bag, Gus. And I'll tell you honestly, I mean, I get a lot of them. He makes a lot of comments about, sound clean power and policies. And there's a mixture of things that are verifiable and things that are definitely opinion. But I mean, again, it's like, it's a constituent who has, concerns about important issues. And so I take his point of view, to heart. But I mean, in just on this letter, for example, on number 1, measure R, the statement measure R lacks a 10-year expiration date. Well, that's an opinion. That's, we made a decision after, extensive review. And this because you and I we were on the business end. We had a full-on basically, a survey and then professional, opinion on what would be, we looked at it from a functional purpose of, is it better to have one that expires or one that is in perpetuity? And then where are the voters on this? So, I mean, we really looked at it from all of the angles, but he's insisting that it's a fact that he's asserting that it should have a 10-year expiration. And that's not a fact, that's an opinion. So in that case, it's like, I just take it as his opinion, and it says, and it also, he says it has no sunset provision and the tax will never end. Well, that's patently untrue, because the fact is that the voters can revoke it at any time. Is that a high hurdle to meet? Yes, it is. But this is not factually true. And so that's kind of, how I look at it. And I certainly value getting feedback and opinion and concerns about, you know, about these policy issues. But I think you're right. I mean, from a functional point of view, I don't think I want the city manager or any member of staff sitting down and, you know, countering these or taking these on point by point. It's correspondent, it's his point of view, it's his advice. And I mean, I do take it into, you know, consideration when I'm talking about, you know, these and other issues moving forward. But I think that, but in addition to his correspondence and his point of view, I also am taking into consideration the fact that we hired a consultant to do a survey, take a professional scientific survey, have staff members weigh in on, you know, what the realities are of our current budget and what are the need to find other sources of revenue. And then of course, support from other members of the community as well. I mean, you know, each of these is just one voice and one point of view. So I give it that amount of weight, because we're certainly hearing endorsements and support from a wide group of people in Cloverdale who really appreciate that we put Measure R on the ballot, and think that, you know, because it does so much to support our police and dispatchers, that it needs to be a reliable source of revenue that isn't going to just, you know, that isn't going to sunset. So that's just kind of how I'm looking at this particular, look at this one and all of the correspondence that we get.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if does that help?
Yeah. and
Sorry, you caught me. I'm in question answering mode. I just came off like a 4-hour meeting with the League of Cities. So I'm in like, you know,
you're in campaign
I'm in
mode.
address the issues mode. Yeah, exactly. We just debated 2 propositions for like, you know, 2 hours apiece, and I am like raring to go. Sorry.
That's okay. I'll bring it up next meeting.
Okay. Well, I don't think I'm in it. Should I mean, you know, city manager, is that, you know, is that kind of our, I mean, that's kind of how I'm looking at how we're responding to this and other letters like this.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I want to say, you know, we're making the letter public.
Yeah.
And it's part of a subcommittee agenda. It's reviewable by the community.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think that's one of the most important things we can do, is that not to hide the correspondence that we get, is that get it out there and look at the various opinions of people on lots of different issues.
Mm-hmm. There was one point that I just wanted to address in regards to this correspondence, and share with Kevin Thompson, our assistant city manager, community development director, did send an email response to Mr. Kozlowski. We didn't want to get into the debate with him on items 1 through 5 relative to his position on Measure R. You know, may not be appropriate. But with respect to Measure, comment number 6, has got $1 million available from PG&E yet to be spent. I want to go on the record. We have no such money available from PG&E. Certainly the council would be aware of it if we were provided $1 million from PG&E. I'm assuming that this may be related to maybe a settlement that either the county or the city of Santa Rosa may have received to the 2017 Tubbs fire. But in so much as this comment is made, we have no factual information to support this comment. Of course, I wish we had $1 million from PG&E to be able to spend for upgrades. But you know, we'll circle back with him, and maybe he's thinking it's a grant program or some other type of program that's available. But my knowledge, PG&E has never provided funds directly to cities in the way of the funding, you know, that can be used towards, you know, microgrids or other backup electrical systems. Just there's no programs that have been brought to my attention relative to his comment on this particular correspondence.
Thank you, David.
Great. Okay. So let's see. Let's move on. make sure I'm not muted. I'm not. Great. And we'll move on to public comment. This is where members of the public may comment on any matter that is not on the agenda. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. Members of the public may comment on this item when the subcommittee considers that item. To make a public comment, use the raise hand icon on your smart device or desktop computer, or dial *9 if you're using just your telephone. And Irene, do we have any members of the public who wish to make public comment?
No public comment, Chair.
Great. Not great, but you know, thank you. So we'll move on to item 4, approval of minutes. Mr. Mayor, do you have a chance to review the minutes? Oh, and you're on mute.
Sorry. I have, and I'm comfortable with them the way they're submitted. Thank you.
Yes, yes. So they are approved. We'll move on to item 5 and current items for discussion, presentation by management partners. COVID-19 recession impact and long range forecast. Are we getting them in as panelists, Irene?
Yes, we are.
Great.
And Madam Chair and Mayor Walter, if I can, just to introduce this item, the city retained management partners to perform a long-range financial forecast that was ultimately presented to council in 2019, and it helped council formulate some strategies around development of the budget. Obviously, post 2019, we pandemic related to COVID-19, and as part of the budget development process, we did a lot of work to evaluate the impacts of the COVID-19 recession on the city's budget and long-range financial forecast. But we really wanted to have an independent analysis done to validate the work that particularly our finance director performed, and myself and city staff as part of the budget development process. But it's in addition to that, also realizing that COVID-19 was going to have a significant impact on our budget, not just in the current time frame or the current budget year, but also going forward. And as we recognize that this may present an opportunity to really relook at how city conducts business, to determine whether there are some strategic changes that may be necessary to really adapt to what we're often referring to as going to be a new normal. And there's a lot of discussion about whether that's the right term or not, but certainly adapt to a changed environment that is occurring. There's a lot of transformation in process right now as the whole world adapts to COVID-19. And so, management partners with their team of experts, Amy Bellman, and Bob Lewin, Rick Hayden, and Heng Yi, all with considerable municipal experience in being finance directors, city managers, and key staff for other cities, bring that expertise and really do a deep dive on our budget and look at what are some potential strategies that we may employ. These aren't I want to caveat, these aren't easy, low-hanging fruit. I mean, there might be some things that are we can start doing right away, but these are big looks at our budget and ways that we may have to, as part of adapting to this new economic reality, really take a look at. So what you're going to do is you're going to get a presentation today, overview from management partners on first kind of the impacts of COVID-19 on our budget. Again, a lot of which has already been addressed in the budget itself, but kind of give you that best case, worst case scenario, and then really dive into a set of strategies. I think there's 13 for consideration. this is really kind of again, I think a starting point. It's discussion. There's a lot behind these individual strategies that need to be looked at, but we're prepared to talk about them more. But I really don't want to leave anything off the table. As I've shared with our senior staff, we may really need to start looking at how we conduct business as a city, and some of those historic practices may be things we have to look at differently. Not because we want to necessarily, but because we have to. But as part of that, we may want to. I won't say any more. I think the presentation will kind of speak for itself. And this is just a start of a pretty deep discussion about some real budget strategies to help align us to be more financially secure going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over. I think we'll be joined by Andrew and Robert.
Thank you, David. I'm Andy Belknap with Managing Partners, and I'm here with colleagues Bob Leland and Rick Hayden, and we're going to present this PowerPoint to you, Councilmember Bagby and Mayor Wolter. Let me say let's go to the first slide, Bob. You got it. Just a little bit of an introduction to Management Partners. We exclusively serve local government, cities, counties, and special districts. We've been in business for a good long time, over 25 years. We have served local governments throughout the United States, but we have a lot of clients in California and do a lot of work in California. We have 2 offices in California, in San Jose and Costa Mesa, although I will confess that most of us have been working from home for the last 6 months, but I know that's something that we're all trying to get used to. We do a lot of fiscal modeling and planning particularly for cities. We have a pretty robust model. The architecture is pretty robust. It was really developed in really difficult circumstances where when we were working for the city of Stockton in their bankruptcy, we had to have something that would perform in federal court against in the litigation of that case. Next slide, Bob. I'm going to turn it over to Bob here. I just want to say at the outset that Cloverdale is actually in pretty good shape. David talked about some of the challenges, and they're definitely there, but you have some things that are going in your favor too. And even though we expect that this recession will be serious, and there will be some challenges to Cloverdale, you are, and we've done dozens of these, of this modeling work for different kinds of cities around the state. Generally, you've got more maneuvering room than I think is typically the case, and we'll get into that when we talk about the strategies. So Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Mayor, council member, and committee members. I showed this particular chart last year. It is still relevant, and it does give you a little bit of sobering context. You can see by the dotted red line, pre-Great Recession, that was the growth rate of revenues per capita. Obviously, what has ensued since the Great Recession, has not been anywhere near close to that trend line. The blue line is the actual general fund revenue per capita, and it has sort of languished, declined initially with the Great Recession, gradually improved, but even now is just, barely up to the pre-recession peak. That yellow area is the gap that exists between where you are now and that pre-recession trend. Even if you had assumed not the 7.8% compound annual growth rate of pre-recession, but just a 3% growth rate, you can see the dotted line there, you're still well below that level. And so it is difficult to fund a constant level of services to the community over time with per capita revenue that can't keep up. And we're just going into, this chart ends in 2020. The recession is going to widen that gap. So let's just take a quick look at the nature of your revenues in the general fund and where the risk factors are relative to the pandemic recession. I've got 4 items highlighted on this chart. In blue is the property tax, and that includes the money you get from the retirement tax transfer. Now, property tax values are holding firm. They're actually, in most of the country, continuing to rise. The housing finance market is sound. So we're not looking at a loss of any significance in the property tax. The retirement tax rate calculation is set by the city, and there is a transfer into the general fund from the retirement tax fund. We're going to talk more about that later because that is an important issue. The pink area, other sources, are relatively stable, and interfund and other transfers are controlled by the city, and we're not seeing decreases in those other areas. The yellow area is comprise elastic sources. Those are most vulnerable, and as the economy is changing, those tend to change in real time. Sales tax, hotel tax, business license tax, and fees. Now, the good news here is that they only comprise 19% of your budget. Many cities, they are upwards of half, sometimes even more. And that exposes them more to the type of recession that we're having right now. The last little sliver is building permits and fees. That's driven by new construction levels. Initially, that seemed to taper off, but housing demand still seems strong. So we're looking at that yellow slice of the pie as being the most important. Now, I will note that under that pink section is the utility user tax. Now, it does expire in January of 2023 unless renewed by the voters, and you have Measure R on the ballot, and you discussed that a little bit earlier. So we're assuming that it passes looking at this. Obviously, if it doesn't pass, there's going to be a big hole in that pink section of the pie. Now, if we go in the Wayback Machine to the Great Recession and do a quick comparison between what happened then and now, there's quite a difference. We're using the same colors as from the pie chart. So the blue is property tax, the orange is the building permits, the yellow is the elastic sources. Now, there were enormous losses from the Great Recession that Cloverdale experienced, but you can see most of that was centered in building permits and fees, and that's because new construction ground to a halt, and property tax because values declined. The yellow area was sales tax, hotel tax, and carry over here to the chart on the right, you can see yellow is the primary impact. And there's more of a loss in those sources in the first year of this recession than there was in the first year of the Great Recession. You can see how losses in that category of revenues grew over 3 years and then took several years to taper off and eventually catch up with where it would have been had there been no recession at all. So again, the elastic sources are the important ones. We're not looking at a housing market crash. You know, we're just looking at high unemployment having an impact, shifting of purchases from brick and mortar to internet. So, and a minimal impact on the property tax. So a big impact. Overall, we're not looking at the same level of revenue loss as with the Great Recession. Now, in terms of the loss from this recession, there are different ways to look at it, and it depends on your assumption for the period of recovery. And I've shown three alternatives here. The one in the middle, the baseline, is what we're assuming in the rest of the forecast that we'll be showing you. And that comes to an $870,000 revenue loss from fiscal year 20 through fiscal 24. If you were optimistic and assumed a much quicker recovery, losses would extend over 2 years. It isn't exactly a V-shaped recovery because we're not saying that fiscal 20 is the one and only year of loss. We're looking at losses this year as well, and frankly, out through 2024 under the baseline assumption. But under the lower loss, we're assuming that losses would end by fiscal 22, and you would have about half the loss, 440,000. On the other hand, a higher level of loss prolongs it over a 5-year period. That gets to be a little bit more like the Great Recession in terms of the time frame for recovery. That would be a loss of 1.2 million. In all these cases, the loss is after $114,000 CARES Act funding that is being received this fiscal year. And we're also using the Avenue Insights projections for sales tax and other losses. We have factors within the model that are projecting that loss during the COVID recession. So if you take all the revenues and just put them in two bunches, elastic and everything else, you get kind of an interesting look. Here on the left, then you've got property tax, UUT, all the various other sources, other than here on the right, sales tax, TOT, business permits, fines, etc. So these stable sources, they weren't so stable back in the Great Recession. Obviously, they dropped quite a bit and then have pretty steadily recovered, and we're assuming a pretty steady line here on out. Assuming again, for the purposes of this chart, that the UUT is continued. Now, the elastic sources here on the right, you can see there was a big dip for the Great Recession, pretty steady recovery, but now they have dipped again because these are the sources that are getting hit right now. So we see the dip over the next couple years, then a recovery period, and then you see another smaller dip starting in 2027, which is when we're assuming the next recession will occur. Over the last 100 years, they have averaged about every 7 years. So we're assuming as bad as the one is that we're in now, that very possibly in 7 years, the next one will roll along. But you can see that these elastic sources, this is between $1 and $2 million here, compared to the stable sources are at $5 to $6 to $7 million over time. So the elastic sources, while affected now, are not the majority of your revenue. Okay, so let's take a look at some other key assumptions. We've discussed the COVID-19 losses. In terms of personnel, we have 2.5% wage growth over time. We have some additional small growth, which is the net of step increases and the savings that are realized when there's turnover, because somebody at a higher level step is typically replaced by somebody at a lower step. We have a low 2% vacancy savings rate. We have initially a 4% growth rate for health, declining slowly over time. We have no additional FTEs over time, so we're assuming that the current level of staffing continues. Now, in terms of pension costs, we have the latest CalPERS investment return, which was 4.7%, which was below the 7% goal that they were looking for. Whenever it dips, it tends to get a little better the next year, so we're assuming 10% the next year, and then ongoing 6.2%. Now, that's lower than the 7% discount rate. It's the estimate that their Wilshire Associates investment advisor had projected as an average return over the next decade. And we're assuming in line with that, the 7% discount rate does continue to fall to 6.5% over 20 years. The discount rate has steadily declined over the last 30 years from 8.75% to the current 7%. So both of these assumptions are a little on the conservative side, but we think that they do reflect the reality that given some of the conservative things that CalPERS wants to do in terms of rate stabilization, that is going to bring down yields, and the discount rate we think will follow that. Now, we mentioned health, and there's one additional issue with health, and I'm going to show you a chart on that in a minute. The forecast actually reduces the projected health costs to 75% of the current budget based on past history. We'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. Other key items, we got 2% growth for overtime and part-time growth, 2.25% for other benefits, 2.5% for other operations and maintenance, no change in debt service. We have plugged in $100,000 a year annually for capital, and that grows at 3% over time. In terms of fund balance, there's actually 1.9 million in balance that's assigned, and we are not assuming that that's available to help balance the budget. And then, as I mentioned, this last item on the utility users tax, it does expire in 2023. It will be on the ballot in 2020. It was a close call last time. This has been a very strange year, so it's hard to say how this election is going to turn out, but we will find out soon enough. Now, the issue on the retirement tax requires a little bit of discussion, and we covered this last year, so I want to go through this again. Case law limits the costs that you can recover when a pension property tax rate is levied. You can only include the costs of retirement benefits that were contracted for prior to July 1, 1978. So that's 42 years ago. And so it's going to exclude, by definition, the costs of any benefits that the city added after the passage of Proposition 13. There's been a court case and an appellate case decision on that. So what we did, we have a couple of other clients that similarly have these retirement taxes. And in the case of Oxnard, a city of about 200,000 in Ventura County, they have a pension tax that applies only for their police and fire plans, not miscellaneous. But we've worked there for several years, and we took their how they handle this issue, and they have a compliance review conducted annually by John Bartel Associates, and the latest was just in April. And so there are three key areas to consider. So in Oxnard, the city pickup of employee share is ineligible, 100%. In the case of Cloverdale, the calculations initially include the cost of the city pickup. In Oxnard, there's then a share of the normal cost, which is determined to be ineligible. And that's above and beyond the pickup, which isn't included. And that's around 10%. Now, Cloverdale excludes, on the safety side, 8.2% of an after added benefit. Now that's relatively close to the number that's excluded in Oxnard, but it's computed in a different way. And the amounts that are ineligible are going to vary by city. There's about 13 of them that have this particular tax. It just depends on their respective benefit levels and when those benefits were adopted. Then the third category is in Oxnard, a portion of the unfunded accrued liability is ineligible. It's about 27.6% for police and a lesser amount, about 13% for fire. Cloverdale does not exclude any UAL. So the only way that you're really going to be able to address these, it would be our recommendation to bring John Bartel Associates in. He's had experience working in cities that have gotten sued and cities that haven't gotten sued, but that have these types of provisions. And he will go through it and come up with a determination of what's appropriate in these areas. And it may be close to what you have now, it may not be. And so what we have done here is given you two options. Option A is just computing it the way it is now using the past city methodology. And option B omits the pickup, counts only 80% of the UAL, and then keeps your after added benefit deduction as a proxy for the portion of the normal cost that shouldn't be counted. So this is what we have gotten in terms of these two options. So if you look at this chart on the left, it shows you the difference between option A and B. The red line starting from 2004 is the actual retirement transfer into the general fund. And under option A, it would continue along the red line. And right now it's about $1.1 million, and it would continue to grow over time. Now, option B has these offsets, and so you would decline. It's basically in the future would parallel the option A, but it would do so from a lower level. So this is the range in which you are likely to fall, bringing somebody in to do a compliance audit on that area. Now here on the right side, I'd mentioned health earlier. The reason why the forecast goes with 75% of the budget, you can see here from 2015 to 2021, this has been the adopted budget for health, but the blue line is what's actually happened. So from 2004 till 2020, these are actuals. And so we've used that as a base and continued to grow. So there will be some significant growth, but it won't be from this high level. The difference is about $150,000. And so we felt that at the outset, it was appropriate to show the lower level of health costs. Now, this has nothing to do with the actual benefits that employees receive. It's just a question of how conservative you want to be in budgeting for it. And so I think there's a variety of factors in the past, budgeting vacant positions at a family level and some other items that have caused the budget to just come out higher than the ultimate cost. Okay, so now where the rubber hits the road here, what happens to fund balance and shortfalls? So what you're looking at is two different options here. The two charts on the top are for option A, and that's where the current city retirement tax methodology is used over time. And what you see in the upper left is a fund balance. The blue dotted line is where you want to be. That's your reserve goal. The green line is where you would be if there had been no recession at all. And over time, you would gradually begin dropping. The red line is with the recession. And so you just drop that much sooner because of the revenue loss up front. And so you can see that you're basically hitting a deficit, but by the time you hit 2026, you would be in deficit. And off to the right here, this is the annual change in the general fund unassigned balance. And these red amounts are the deficit numbers, the shortfalls, and they average about $530,000 a year.
Can I interrupt you for a second and
Sure.
just ask a quick question just to clarify?
Yep.
And I don't want to hold it to the end because it goes specifically to how these charts are working. So when you were talking about the recession and the effects of the recession from 2008, which was a result of the housing bubble, fast forward to the COVID recession, there aren't the same economic structural issues with this recession, and I know that there's a lot of disagreement amongst economists as to what the recovery is going to look like. So I'm just wondering, kind of, what model as far as the effects of a recession and recovery did you look at? Did you look at was it kind of the same model as 2008? Was it a quick recovery and after COVID because the same conditions don't exist, or did you use kind of something in the middle?
Well, I think this slide, we'll go back to this one that we covered earlier.
I was going to ask it then, actually.
This is probably I think this, well, we're going quick.
Okay.
So I think this responds best. If you look at the Great Recession, that was terrible. And it was the big loss in property tax and no construction. And so that orange and the blue caused the losses to be so great. I mean, this is the percent below the pre-recession forecast. And at one point, your revenues totaled about 35% below what they would have been otherwise. And they didn't really, I mean, they're barely caught up today. As of fiscal 19, they were still down somewhat. But this shows a prolonged recovery, and it shows major losses in building permits and property tax. So you crank over here to the right-hand side, and you see very minor impacts in those two areas. Now the yellow in these first, certainly the first couple years, because it hits 5%, you can see going over to the left, it's actually a worse loss in those areas than it was during the Great Recession, but then it tapers off over a couple of years and you're back to normal. So it's not nearly as prolonged a recovery period as existed during the Great Recession, but it's a sharper impact up front, and that makes perfect sense because everything just shut down for months.
Right. And then just kind of a follow-up question to that too. There's also the added aspect of the fact that online sales are here to stay, and so and that buying patterns are really shifting. You know, obviously, until we have hovercrafts and jetpacks, we're still going to buy our food and go out to eat locally. But when we're talking about, other retail purchases, you have the impact of, Amazon.com just not going away, just an online sales not going away, and the nature of those purchases changing. So can you kind of just put that into perspective as far as you see the impacts to non-food retail?
Yeah, a lot of people are observing that this recession is accelerating trends that were already underway.
That's kind of my point. Thank you.
Yeah,
so I wonder
exactly.
if you could just talk about how that got worked into how you did these projections.
So an example with the online purchases, you can go down to the grocery store and buy toilet paper, or you can order it through Amazon and have it delivered to your house. But because of changes with Amazon, even before the Wayfair decision, but even after the Wayfair decision, but basically out-of-state online purchases are getting captured now. And money is getting to the city one way or another, whether it's coming through its share of the pool or whether it's coming directly. Now, that trend, I don't see any way that trend is going to change. It's just going to accelerate. But here's a new trend for you, which is that people that used to eat out at restaurants more are getting gun shy of that. And some restaurants are just going out of business and aren't available to be gone to in any event. And it may be that people rediscover the art of fine art of cooking, and they wind up they acquire their food in a way that doesn't generate a sales tax, whereas with a restaurant, it does. And so
that's not a surprise here, Bob. That's how we're living. So
yeah, so that's a trend that may stay too. Now you are not a big convention area, but there are cities that have convention centers and rely on conferences, or they're a university town and they've got a lot of campus activity. How much is that going to change? I mean, it's changed a lot already. A lot of annual conferences are being done virtually. And even when they go back to having a real conference in person, not as many people may attend, So there are a lot of these trends that may continue. So the real question here, the question that's being begged here is that it's showing a loss below the pre-recession forecast, but that's pre-recession normal. What does normal look like in the future? It may not look like 2019 normal. And so the reality is some people are saying, well, maybe our TO tax will never totally recover, or maybe some of the sales tax just, it won't be there. And so, you know,
Well,
it's
and
a
you,
food for thought.
that's exactly why I'm asking that question, because it's exactly this kind of information, you know, where we have to begin with the end in mind. And because, you know, I know that you know, because you have a background in this, and everybody, you know, here has a background in this, but we have to begin with the end in mind. I mean, as what you're telling us about our sales tax forecast, our TOT forecast, has a direct impact, or at least it should, on our zoning and our planning.
Yeah.
You know, on our built infrastructure and where we need to, you know, where we need to invest in infrastructure. So that's why I'm trying to really, you know, get to the bottom of this and find out, you know, what criteria are you using, what's behind the model that you're using, because that's just going to be so important for us making decisions
Just,
going
you know,
forward.
one more point to make, and that is that Cloverdale is probably in a situation where a number of your residents commute, or at least they used to, into San Francisco or maybe to Santa Rosa.
So to Santa Rosa and job centers in Marin and
Right?
places like
and
that.
So maybe they're staying home now. So maybe your daytime population is actually a little bit higher than it was before.
I think that is exactly what's happening. That's the anecdotal evidence shows that we are actually the people who used to commute out of town and do their shopping there are staying home working and then doing their shopping here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so I agree. I think we're much better off than some of our other surrounding areas that have become very dependent on TOT, very dependent on visitor dollars and sales tax.
Right.
Whereas we're a bigger share of our revenue is in property tax. We've been jealous of them for decades, but now they're kind of jealous of us. So, and that's where I really want to drill down and get to the bottom of this, because I think that it's, and also the other thing before we get too much further, and you may be addressing this later on, is that trend of our commuters, or, you know, our second homeowners are coming here and living here. And that's something that Press Democrat, the local paper has been covering that. The people from the Bay Area are saying, you know, if we're going to be home and the kids are going to be home, we're going to go up north and buy a house with a pool. You know, we're going to go home and buy a house with a bigger kitchen because there just isn't enough room for us to do all this, you know, home cooking. It's all the trends that you just sort of touched on. We're seeing those happen and being reported in real time. So I guess my question and the question that I've put to David on a couple of different occasions is that the pandemic has, like you said, exposed trends that were already happening. But one of the things that I really want to get a handle on is the trend of working from home, and what's going to be the core that we can kind of depend on. It is, you know, what percentage is going to stay that way, so that when we are doing our planning for the future, we're taking that in mind. Because, and I think you've also hit on one of our biggest economic challenges is the retail leakage that we have in Cloverdale. So if people are living here and working here and buying here, then that's actually a problem that's getting solved by the pandemic. So how do we also incorporate that into our mid-range, or short-term, mid-range, and long-term plans?
Yep. Okay.
So I'm sorry to hijack your
No,
presentation,
that was good to cover it. And I'm just about done with this. But so coming back to this, we've got the two options, current retirement tax methodology, and then a more restrictive calculation that's bringing in less revenue to the general fund from the retirement tax. And you can see that this top approach, it's about $530,000 a year shortfall. The other approach is $740,000 a year average shortfall. And so you can see the lines curve down here to a lower level if the retirement tax transfer is less. So the first thing that I wanted to show you is, before you do anything to fix the situation, this is what it looks like. This pretty well brackets, I think, where you end up, assuming you get a compliance audit done. So now let's take a look under that option A, which is the current retirement tax calculation. We have two more options. Option A1 is measure R passes and the UUT is renewed. If that happens, all you have to do is cut $150,000 a year or find $150,000 a year in increased revenue. You can phase that in over 4 years and your balance will look like this, very close to your reserve goal. So the 4 years means you don't have to make a decision right away. You have time. You can also watch as events unfold. We have some cities that don't have this luxury. They've had to make a decision within the current year. You actually have 4 years. That gets back to what Andy said at the outset, is that you are set up in a way where you're, and as you said, other people may be envious of you now. You have a smaller portion of your revenue, which is subject to getting hit. So it buys you more time. Okay, this is if it's renewed. Now let's say it's not renewed. If it's not renewed, that bumps up the need to come up with $500,000 in additional resources. Again, either increased revenue or decreased expense. Again, you can phase it in over 4 years. Ultimately, you wind up a little lower, 1.3 million and 1.6. But if you notice this little downturn starting in 26 and 27, that's the assumed next recession. So in either case here, if you were continuing to calculate your retirement tax the way you do now, it depends on whether Measure R passes. Even if Measure R fails, you've got one more chance in 2022, but this gives you a range. And so the next one, option B, is the same thing. This is the lower level of retirement tax transfer, which means everything's going to be bumped up. If Measure U is renewed, you're going to need 400,000 to close the gap. If the UUT is not renewed, you're going to need 750,000 to close the gap. So if you kind of look at these together, option A, a low of 150,000, option B, up to as much as 750,000. It just depends. It's like a little matrix. It depends on the two options: tax renewed or not renewed, retirement tax calculation, more liberal, more restricted. Okay. So that is giving you context for the second half of our presentation, which then goes into options. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Andy and advance the slides for he and Rick.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. Why don't you go to the next slide? Okay, we're gonna start talking about the budget strategies, but let me just say at the outset that in doing this work, that percentage delta that you saw in Bob's presentation, what you need to do, it gets up, the highest it gets to is 8.2%. And in the sort of the worst case scenarios, it's between 5 and 8.2%. And when I say delta, I mean whatever the changes you make, whether it's expenditure reduction or revenue enhancement, those are those percentages can be challenging for local government because it is hard to make changes. But it's not, it's quite doable with pretty mainstream strategies as long as you're below 10%. And you are below 10%, which is a good thing because, like I said, it gives you more maneuvering room. So we always look at these strategies through this lens of fiscal sustainability planning, because you don't want to make cuts that hurt you in the long term. If you're trying to get through a recession, you want to do things that you have to do, but which don't impose long-term costs on the organization or on the community. So we typically look first at the first three fiscal sustainability strategies: expenditure controls and cost shifts, service delivery alternatives, and revenue enhancements. And we'll be showing those to you. We look last at service level reductions because typically your community is wanting more services, not less. I've never worked in a city or worked for a city where the community was saying, nah, we don't need those services. That's not the world you live in. So we look at those things last because obviously it's the last thing you want to do. So let's go to the next slide, Bob. Slide 17.
You should see slide 17.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of a delay with seeing the.
We're seeing
good,
factors
good.
used to evaluate.
Yeah, this is just
budget strategies. Okay.
Yeah, this is another iteration on that fiscal sustainability planning approach. Now, in the real world, there's not. If you look at that quadrant in the high right-hand side of this chart, where it says minimal difficulty or high potential of success and big money over $100,000, there's not a lot there because that's already stuff that you have done. That's just good business that you will, when you see something like that, you will do it. Most of the strategies are going to be sort of in the middle or towards the lower left-hand side of the chart, where there's some level of difficulty, either moderate or significant, and the potential annual gains are not over 100,000 annually, although we do have a few of those. So, and then in terms of implementation difficulty factors, on the far left-hand side, these are the things we look at that we try to qualitatively evaluate. And again, what we're looking for here is things that will not do long-term damage to the organization or the community. And so these things kind of measure that. Next slide, Bob, 18. Did you get
Andy,
it?
if you want to go, yeah, we're seeing it way before you. If you want to go to your local version, we can
Okay,
just
I
keep
will.
up on slide numbers.
Yeah, I got lazy about this. I'll bring up a local version. I don't know why it's taken so long on my end. It's moving, but it takes a while.
Sounds like you need some high-speed internet in your neighborhood. So.
You want to take over, Rick, if you can
Sure.
see it,
Sure.
and then I'll get a local copy going.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, everybody. The slide you see in front of you is a summary slide as to the strategies that we have put forward. As Andy went over the 4 areas, expenditure controls, we have an array of strategies out there upwards to about $680,000. The service delivery changes, about $1 million in potential strategies. Revenue enhancements, close to 800,000. And then service level reductions, those are things that no one likes to see, but we have an obligation to put them forward, is about 160, giving you a total of about 2.6, almost $2.7 million in potential strategies. Now, these are an array of various strategies. There's 13 in total. And the thought is that the city should identify about 750,000, almost $750,000 in annual strategies. And what we've done is we've provided you more than enough options, we think, almost 3.5 times the amount that you really need to come forward with as far as strategies, because some you may not want to do for for political reasons or operational reasons. And that's why it's always better to give you more than give you the exact amount that you have to shoot for. So Bob, next slide, please. So, you know, I'm going to go over the 13 strategies, and if anyone has any questions along the way, please feel free to stop me and we can go through them. The first one is the city has your retirement through the CalPERS system, everybody knows, and the city pays a portion of the employee share. And one of the things that we have seen is that a lot of cities over the last several years have made a effort to reduce their share that they pay on behalf of the employees and start shifting that over to the employees. In your case, because you do have the retirement tax, the net impact would not be as significant to the city. We're looking at around $16,000 a year, but you know, that is one of the things that we wanted to address with the city and put on the table. That would require something to sit down with your unions and in your employee associations and do a meet and confer process, because that is a condition of employment. Bob, next slide, please. The other one is, number 2, is reduce your actual budget for medical and other benefits. As Bob mentioned in a couple of slides previously, this does not have an impact as far as your employees are concerned. This is more of a paper transaction from a budgeting perspective. And you know, we have noticed that over the last several years, you know, the city has over budgeted for health and medical insurance. And that is something that happens consistently throughout the state of California. It's better to be conservative when you budget for health benefits than not. However, during lean times, when you have to look at reducing operational expenses, one of the things to look at is a strategy to eliminate over budgeted items as opposed to personnel. So this one comes at around $160,000 a year as far as actual savings. And again, this is not something that needs to be negotiated with your employees. It's something that staff can do administratively from a budgeting perspective. The next one is the general fund support for the airport. We've noticed that the general fund does supply financial support for the airport. However, the airport is an enterprise fund, and it should operate as an enterprise fund. And because the benefits are not to the community in totality, it's to a selected group of individuals that utilize the airport. And so, you know, one of the things is that the city could reduce the financial contribution, albeit it's only around $10,000 right now annually, but they could reduce that allocation and take a look at increasing possibly the fuel costs or the rental rates that they charge for the hangars at the airports. What we've seen throughout the state of California is airport districts normally operate as an enterprise fund, and they really don't get subsidized by the general fund from that perspective. The next one, talking about subsidies, is we've noticed that in your community development department, it operates as an enterprise fund. And similar to the airport and some of your other enterprise funds, they should be self-supporting. And one of the things is that your cost recovery, basically the charges that you assess builders and contractors for planning fees, building inspection fees, things of that nature. In totality, you're averaging around a 28% recovery of your costs. And normally cities try to operate around 70% of recovering their costs. But that's usually when they're in part of the general fund. When they're an enterprise fund, the goal, like any other enterprise fund, is to recover 100% of their fees through fees for services. However, we're looking at it more of a realistic aspect. And we think that if you were to cover 70% of your fees, that would at least get you about $250,000 a year, which if you do a fee study with your comparable jurisdictions up in your area, you may see that your fees might be a little bit lower compared to other jurisdictions.
And can I just interject and ask David and Kevin, haven't we done a fee assessment recently?
We have. We keep tabs on other people's fees. This particular item we are working on and is definitely one of the more doable items. We're hoping with OpenGov and other software, we can track our time better and do a better job here.
Yeah, that kind of was my follow-up question too, is that how much of it's a function of our kind of, antiquated time tracking, and can we pick up some of those hours?
Yes, we are. I'm committed to doing it, and it's something that we can certainly work on. There are some permits that just have a set amount that they cost, and that's what they are. And if it takes us longer, then we eat a little bit on those. At the same time, just to be kind of business friendly, we maybe not want to charge $10,000 for a use permit or something, but we can take a look at it. Some of them we've kept just at a set fee, just to try to encourage people to come in and get permits and to try to be a little more business friendly. But the larger ones with bigger projects, we're going to start definitely committed to do a better job on tracking our time and recouping some of those costs.
I think we might have to introduce a new term to, as opposed to being business friendly, being ratepayer friendly, and everybody sharing the burden. So we're trying to be good students here, Rick. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to touch base and just make sure that we were refresh my memory where we were on this item. So thank you.
Well, Madam Chair, if I can real quick, Rick, the program OpenGov came up. Have you worked with that program with any other cities? Are you familiar with it at all?
I am familiar with that, and it more and more cities are going towards that platform because it allows staff to keep track of their time a lot better. And then also on the flip side, for those people that are developers, it also provides them an ability to find out where their project is in the pipeline and how it's moving along. So it creates not only more information, but also accountability from that perspective.
One of the selling points, of course, was the cost savings that the city would eventually realize once we implemented the program. Do you see that coming to fruition here?
Oh, I would defer that to Kevin because he's more familiar with your day-to-day operations from that perspective. But one of the things is every time you on a program like that, even though there is some initial costs up front, the intent, and it's proven throughout the state, is you can recoup those costs over the next several years in efficiencies.
Thank you.
The next one is the implementation of cost allocations and administrative overhead charges. The city does a good job in charging non-general fund departments overhead charges or cost allocations. Primarily, if you have a finance department, they provide financing for the water department, or they provide financing for gas funds, street funds, and then you're able to charge those funds a certain percent of the cost for finance to those departments to recoup your overhead charge. One of the things that we saw is that there are a couple funds that don't get charged overhead, and that leaves room for an ability for the general fund to recoup some of their costs that they're spending. We estimate that to be about $21,000 annually. And we say that's conservative because, for example, like in your CDBG programs, we notice that a lot of your funding goes directly towards projects. And you could actually recoup some of your staff time for administering those projects that's authorized through CDBG and HUD from that perspective.
Madam Chair, this is David Kelly. If I can, just to interject on that, I actually have a question for Rick. You know, we looked at this, staff did, particularly with respect to the gas tax fund. And I guess a question came up is, you know, ultimately we end up utilizing general fund to cover the additional, you know, expenses within that fund. So we were curious, the perspective, you know, is it still better to charge a cost allocation, which then the impact is going to be you're going to have to subsidize it to a greater level with by the general fund. So I guess it's, you know, you're kind of paying for it one way or the other. And I just, you know, is it better still just as a practice to charge administrative overhead or a cost allocation to that fund, even though on the back end you're going to have to subsidize it with general fund revenue to cover the difference between the expenses and the revenues?
We do direct charges. It's a lot of staff time to do that. When you have a cost overhead that's pretty consistent, and so you're not spending a lot of time from that perspective. But there's other funds also other than just gas tax. There's, albeit it's not a large amount of money, but your public education is and government fund could be charged an overhead charge as far as that's concerned. And possibly your SB1 funds could be charged overhead as well too.
Got it. Thank you.
The other thing that we took a look at is contract services. And we saw that there was a trend in previous years that, again, similar to the health insurance, in which the city was sometimes not budgeting, or actually they were over budgeting in some line items as far as contractual services are concerned. And I think they addressed it this last year. They reduced their contractual services budget some this last year, but it always is a tendency to take a look at those to see, do you really need the appropriation level that you've used in the past if you haven't been spending that money historically? And then the other thing that we would be recommending, that it's not on this chart, is from a best practice standpoint, any of your professional services agreements that you have, if you haven't gone out and done an RFP over the last couple of years, we always recommend doing that because cities get away from that after a while and they just increase them annually based off of the CPI. But especially during this time right now, there's a lot of professional services that are trying to sharpen their pencil a little bit more and providing better contracts for cities because they're trying to get more business. So, you know, if you haven't gone out with an RFP on some of your professional services agreements recently, that's something you may want to consider doing. Best practice says you want to do it every 3 to 5 years. The next one is a concept that in taking a look at your operations, as far as your calls for service in your police department, we noticed that you have a dispatch service. And then we took a look at your calls for service, and you respond to about 18,000 calls, per year, which correlates to, approximately 2 calls per hour. And you spend close to $1 million in personnel for dispatching. And this is a concept that I've used previously in another jurisdiction down on the central coast of California, in which they contracted with another neighboring jurisdiction to provide dispatch services. And they were able to save close to $1 million a year in staff costs just because of the shifting of no longer needing to do dispatch, albeit they had to charge they get charged from the other agency for that service, but it's significantly less. The example that we have here is the city of Guadalupe, a community of around 8,000 to 9,000 population. They were working with the county sheriff's department and having them do their dispatch. They shifted over to the city of Santa Maria, and they no longer had to have full-time dispatchers, and their annual cost was around $73,000 a year. So, the idea would be to send out a request for proposal to some neighboring jurisdictions to see if they would be looking at willing to provide dispatch services. Now, the other one is from a personnel perspective. One of the practices that we do is we take a look when we do these types of engagements is any type of new positions, any type of reclassified positions that cities have done recently over the last year, year and a half, and reassess that do they need to continue in that level of service, or is that something that they could reassess and possibly go back to? One of the things we came up with here is in doing our review, we noticed that there was one position that was recently reclassified, and that was a sergeant to a lieutenant in the police department. And so the concept here would be that, again, it's an array of strategies that if you needed to, as an alternative, you might be able to take a look at reversing that and having that go back to being a sergeant position. Now, again, we put everything on the table here, and for political reasons or operational reasons, there's possibly another number of reasons why you may or may not want to do it. However, we have our due diligence to put forward these types of strategies. The next one Bob talked about at length, and that was the utility users tax. It's currently expiring in January of 2023, and it was only approved by roughly around 51% of the electorate. But if that is able to be approved again, then that is a considerable, that's almost $500,000 of funding. And I think that's something that has to be on the table. And the city should be looking at going forward with that on a future ballot measure. And then the other thing is TOT, the transient occupancy tax. We've noticed that the city's rate is 10% right now. If you were to raise it 2%, that would be consistent with some of what your neighboring jurisdictions are paying right now. And if you were to put that on the November 2022 ballot, that would not be increased until April of 2023. That would have around a $56,000 increase to your general fund. The beauty of this type of a tax is that your ratepayers, your residents, they're not the ones that pay it. It's the people that come to your community, and it's the people from outside your community that pay it. And we're seeing a lot of cities throughout the state of California going forward on increasing transient occupancy taxes at this time. The other one is quarter cent, we call it a TUT, transaction and use tax. Some people call it sales tax. It would be increasing your sales tax by 1/4%. You have the authority to do it under current legislation right now. You're one of only 2 other cities in the county that have your sales tax at 8.25%. And so you have a lot of capacity in which to to get underneath that legislative ceiling as far as what they authorize. If you were to put it on the ballot in November of 2022, 2 years from now, that wouldn't go into effect until 23. And, you would still be one of the lowest cities in the area with the sales tax from that perspective. The estimated revenue is close to $300,000 annually. So the beauty of this one and also with the previous one is that it's not something that you have to work on right now, because Cloverdale, you're in a different position than a lot of other cities because you have time on your hands right now to address some of these issues over the next couple of years. The next one, again, when we're taking a look at some of the services, is your police auxiliary services. We did notice that, you could reduce some of your part-time staffing and some of your operating supplies in the police department by around $20,000. It's not a lot, but it is an option for you at this time. And then finally, our last suggestion, and we see this in every other city, is the contributions that you make to some of your nonprofits that are within the city. And it's the community support services and cemetery. If you take a look at it over the last several years, you went from making contributions of around $31,000 in 16-17 to upwards of $134,000 proposed for this year. That's over $100,000 in contributions that the city is made, increased annually over the last 4 years to various nonprofits within your community. And, here, like with other suggestions, it's things that we notice that you don't have to do in order not to have a service reduction that we wanted to put on the table for your consideration as well, too. So I would turn it over to Andy right now if he's available, or do you want me to
I'm fine.
continue on? Okay.
I'm fine. So we'll just wrap this up now with slide 32, which is giving you a summary of what we think are some of the higher rated budget strategies. So we think there's about $2.5 million in either high or moderately high rated strategies. So you have some choice. Again, given you're shooting for around a $750,000 annual delta. And we've all just gone through these strategies, so I'll not reiterate them here, but there's a fairly good number of strategies that we think are within reach. Obviously that regional dispatch approach is a big one in this mix, and the city would begin the process of exploring that by probably issuing an RFP to see what other service providers are out there. Slide 33, Bob, if we could have that one. This is just another summary of expenditure controls and cost shifts and the ranking that we gave these various strategies. I don't think there's too much new information here. Slide 34 talks about service delivery changes, and again, that regional dispatch idea is a big one in this area. Slide 35 summarizes the revenue enhancement strategy, and obviously that utility users tax, that's critical, and that's on the ballot. And you do have, if it doesn't pass this year, you have another chance to get it raised, so that should be in the mix for if it doesn't pass for the future. But you do have a number of revenue enhancement strategies that would not price you out of the market when it comes to these taxes. You'd still be well within sort of the regional level that others are charging. Slide 36 is a service level reductions approach that we laid out there. And that completes our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And we'd like to thank particularly David and particularly Susie for all the help that she has been in pulling this together. As you can tell, it's been a deep dive, and we couldn't have done that without all the help from the city staff.
Oh, thank you. It was excellent. I'm going to
I think she said she was going to ask me if I had any questions.
I was. Everybody just froze on me there. So go ahead, Gus. I'm going to go video free.
Well, you know, this is really a lot to digest. And you know, I look at things like eliminating the community support or reducing it to some of our nonprofits. You know, I just don't know how we do things like that. You know, I much prefer the revenue enhancements as opposed to cutting down on expenses. You know, the dispatches, if I'm doing my math correctly, it equates to about $61 per phone call that comes in. And, but I'm also looking at the loss of our employees. So it's a lot to digest. I think, you know, I'm just going to take a pause on it. I'd like to make the recommendation that we sit down with staff and review it and just see how realistic it is for us to do some of these expense cutting and revenue enhancing that's being recommended. I just can't come out and say I agree with everything or I disagree. It's a work in progress. We have to look at this in depth.
Right. Well, and I think that I really appreciate the dispassionate, you know, 30,000 foot view, just to look at everything without those emotional attachments, without those political considerations, without those, you know, I don't want to step on any toes considerations, and just getting the straight facts, because I think we have to start from there. And I kind of look at this as like a cafeteria plan, is that these are kind of where all of the possibilities are, and we need to, you know, pick and choose amongst, you know, what are going to get us the biggest bang for our buck, and, you know, what's you know, what are some places where we're not charging enough for the services that we are providing. So I just really appreciate that. So I just kind of wanted to take an opportunity to say, yeah, thank you for the in-depth look. And then of course we're going to have to take this back, look at it, talk about it amongst senior staff and, you know, all of the council members. And but I do like I do really appreciate the caveat that we have some time to be making these choices too. So we know the dollar amount that we need to get to, but we also have some time to figure out, you know, how these economic impacts are really going to shake out in our community, and, you know, what's possible and what isn't. So yeah, this is just going to be a very valuable tool for us going forward.
And what?
Yeah, go ahead.
One more thing, Madam Chair, if I may. You know, so much is going to hinge on the November 3rd election and what happens with the UUT, Measure R. So before we even start looking at it, I'm suggesting that we wait until after the election to see exactly how everything shakes out. But when we go back to the city council, I'd really like to the full city council, I'd like to see us go back with suggestions. You know, here's a recommendation, we've looked at it, here's the pros and cons of doing it, so that we can make some decisions as opposed to getting 5 different viewpoints at this point in time. let's try
Right.
and
And-
narrow it down for that.
Yeah, and 5 different viewpoints on page 13 isn't going to do us any good because we won't know if the UUT renewal has passed, and we won't know what the time frame is. So that's a really good point. David, as far as timing is concerned, does that work for you? Is we just going to take that approach?
Yes, and I mean, my suggestion actually for council, I think it might be more valuable to host a workshop and really, have a more in-depth discussion on, some of the policy implications of some of these strategies. I think it will be challenging, at a council meeting when we're trying to get business done, without a very long meeting to, do a deep dive on, some of these recommendations. So I kind of think maybe you start of the calendar year
Yeah, we could. You kind of you faded out there, David. So sorry. What's the plan moving forward?
I was going to suggest at the start of the calendar year that we look at hosting a workshop with council where we can look at these strategies, more in depth and in a roundtable fashion.
I think that's a much better approach. It would be really difficult to get through this in a regular council meeting. And, the other factor, other than whether or not the UUT is renewed, it's also, and it's probably a longer term, is the changes that we see with OpenGov and the impacts on, streamlining operations, being able to do more chargebacks, all that and that's going to take a little bit more time for us to see the benefits of that. But we probably need to start marching forward at the beginning of the year. So does that sound good to you, Mr. Mayor?
It does. My fear is, like so many things, things fall through the cracks. I'd hate to see us in July going, whatever happened to that study that we did in the workshop we were supposed to have?
Hey, there's always a mudslide or an earthquake or a flood. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I'd really like to see us not just take this report and put it up on a shelf somewhere. I want to see, maybe we could, I don't know, let's get it. This is an action
item. This is an action item, but it's got to be a workshop. It's got to be a workshop. I agree with that. So
yeah. So let's get it on this agenda as a future agenda item.
Okay.
So that we don't lose track of it. We can talk about it every month.
That sounds good. Does that work for you, David?
Yeah, that direction's clear. We'll keep it on the finance, admin, and police subcommittee agenda for now. If you're so inclined, we can share the presentation and the memo, because the memo I also want to highlight provides additional information that is valuable to the presentation to the rest of the city council to review, read, and digest. And the only reason I'm thinking about later or the start of the calendar year is obviously we have elections, and then we really only have one meeting in November, one meeting in December. And if there is a changeover in the membership of council, it would make it more challenging. And really, it can help kickstart our budget discussion for next fiscal year by reviewing this, inviting management partners back to do a presentation to the full council, and that could be part of our strategy for the next fiscal year budget. Obviously, we'll know at that point where we stand relative to the TOT as well.
Yeah, and just to tie into what David said, also, we knew that some of our budget numbers were, well, to be frank, guesses. And we also knew that we would be coming back at mid-year, and we would be making adjustments either up or down to both revenue and expenditures. So that would be a great time when we're trying to do that as well and tie all that in together.
Yeah. And there again, OpenGov is going to influence that process as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I was just going to say that maybe by then, managing partners could come back and update the report a little bit based on Measure R and some other changes that we may have.
Yeah, would that be helpful, Andy or Bob, or?
No, we'd be happy to help you with that, and we can engage with David and Susie after the first of the year when we know, or actually even before that, when we know what the decision is on Measure R.
Well,
Yeah, and when the workshop is scheduled as well, so.
yeah.
I would say the one other loose end is the compliance audit issue on the retirement tax. You got plenty of time, given the time frame you've been talking about, to talk to Bartel and address that. That's an important element in the mix as well.
And I have reached out to Bartel.
And this is a good time because those actuaries, their workload peaks in the spring when
Yeah.
everybody's trying to get a budget done. So if you reach out to them now, they're liable to be a little more available.
Be able to get them in January.
Yeah.
Great. All right. All right. Well, thank you so much. Are there any other closing comments, City Manager?
Madam Chair, Mayor Walter, if I can, I just want to extend a thank you to Andy Belknap, Bob Leland, and Rick Hayden, and who wasn't able to join us today, Hain Yi, who we work with on the development of this report and forecast. I think it's particularly valuable to help the council think about some strategies that we can look at. Address some of our long-term budget issues. So I think the work that was represented is, a real professional body of work, and really will give council to think about as model and our our budget going forward. So I think this is really informative. So I want to thank the team at Management Partners for the work they did putting this together.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you, gentlemen. You always give us very sound counsel, and we really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
All right.
And
Y'all
we
take
know
care.
you have a full agenda. So,
Thank you, Andy.
okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great. And with that, we'll move on to 5B, which is the purchase of a new police vehicle. What do we have in store?
Okay, well, I'll give you an introduction, then I'll turn it over to Chief Ferguson. There is a memo in the packet that identifies, the issue here is a vehicle that is we are experiencing increased maintenance costs. And one of the things I did when I received the request from the chief to consider purchasing a new vehicle is, look at kind of what the standard is relative to replacing police vehicles. And, this particular vehicle is a 2013 Chevy Tahoe with, slightly over 100,000 miles. It's got over 104,000 miles. So just the basic facts is we're looking at a vehicle that's almost 8 years old, and in excess of 100,000 miles. Looking at kind of what the standard is for police vehicles, you'll typically see a replacement schedule at 5 years. So obviously we've exceeded that. The mileage, the standard is usually about 125. So it's either or. It's either 5 years or 125, whichever sooner. Obviously, this vehicle is 7 years old, but we're at that point where it's generating increasing maintenance costs. This was an item that the chief and the police department did identify originally in the fiscal year 2021 budget. However, in our effort to try to reduce expenditures and bring forward a budget as balanced as it could be, all of the proposed vehicle purchases were eliminated. But Chief obviously in the memo underscores his request for the police department to purchase a new vehicle. So I'll turn it over to Chief. Chief, you want to share with me your perspective on the new vehicle purchase?
Yeah, I lost you at the end there. I mean, you really covered it a lot, David, if I'm being really honest. You know, there's not a whole lot more other than to say that this was something we were seeking in a vehicle capital outlay for this new fiscal year. With the issues with COVID and revenue concerns, we just elected to take it out. But, you know, with that, the cars don't stop working. The cars still have to be out there. This particular vehicle is one that is not only high in mileage, but it's starting to really see its end of its life cycle. And then it becomes not only a maintenance issue, but it becomes a safety factor for not only the community and our response, the ability to respond, but also for the officer's safety. As it stands right now, the vehicle is having some front end issues. We went to have it inspected. It needs a complete overhaul of the front end. And at a minimum, we're looking at $3,000 to $4,000 on that, assuming during that maintenance and repair, it doesn't find other issues. As always, one of the efforts we're going to try to make when we look to ask for something of this nature, we understand the expenses, to try to find ways to help offset the costs associated with that. And my former organization, we used the USDA. It's kind of an obscure way to go about, and not a lot of people know about USDA funds as it relates to police vehicles because it's an agricultural grant. But it's also been successful. I will tell you that the USDA would be, if all gets approved and everything's good, would be able to fund 15% of the overall cost of the vehicle. And the memo shows there we'd be selecting a Dodge Charger. One of the reasons I looked at a Dodge Charger is because I'm familiar with them. And I think when you look at a small community like this, it's perfectly fine for police officers. You have a lot of stop and go, a lot of stop signs. It's a lot of wear and tear on those cars. And I think we'd be looking at some, lesser maintenance fees. And I think we can get more out of the life of these cars. It'll be new here, but I do think it's a better choice for us now. And it's certainly one we'd like to start and give it a shot and see how it works here. There's nothing wrong with a Chevy Tahoe. They serve a fantastic purpose, but they're also larger vehicles. I think the fuel becomes another issue and the expense relative to that. But right now with graphics, the console upgrades and the equipment upgrades for a car, we're looking roughly about 50,000, could be a little more depending on the cost of the car and its availability being extended out. If this is something we are looking to do, of course, and this is something that is going to go to council for approval, if we do select to go with USDA funds, something that we have to understand is that's not eligible until their grant cycle starts. So it wouldn't even put this car out until March or somewhere in that of the following year. So there's something to be considered in that. That is somewhat concerning when you're talking about needing to replace a car now. But as I've put in the memo, the 15% really saves the city about $8,000. So we're going to be paying more than that in maintenance for the current vehicle that's having its issues by the time we reach that area. So the options really are to look at it that way, or simply if it's an option is to try to purchase a vehicle sooner. We can probably get it ordered now and hopefully get it in the first of the year to get it up and running somewhere around that time frame. So that's really what I want to do. David covered a lot, but I just wanted to put a little bit more on there on the necessity for this and the need to be able to respond to the public in crisis and ensure the safety of our officer as well.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, that this was one of the items that we took out thinking we would bring it back at mid-year. We would see how things went, and it just didn't make it to mid-year.
So basically, we need everybody to forget what we just went through for the first 2 hours of this meeting.
Yeah, but with respect to purchasing the vehicle, there's a couple of options. One, we could finance it. Obviously, that's lowers the initial capital expenditure, spreads it out over time, but includes interest. The other option is for us to utilize development impact fee for the purchase price. And I think there's an option, at least justification for the use of impact fees.
So I don't know if everybody could hear David completely, but he was suggesting, and I agree that we could use public safety impact fees to cover either all or a portion of this.
What do
You're
you
on
think,
mute.
Gus? Where are you leaning?
There you go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, a couple things. Chief, I think you and I maybe have had this conversation before. You know, I love the Chargers. And I wish you could buy me one. But with that being said, from an ergonomic standpoint, you know, I'm really concerned about our officers getting in and out of that vehicle, low to the ground, kind of like a bucket seat in it as opposed to a bench seat. You know, from an ergonomical standpoint, is this what we really want? That's number one. Number two is the resale of the old vehicle. Are we going to be selling that and getting any value out of it? Or are we going to be using it as a backup to some extent?
You know,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
No, and then lastly is the 15% USDA. Susie, for some reason, I thought we had an equipment replacement fund in place for this type of purchase. And where do we stand with that? I mean, I don't mind 15%. It's not much. USDA, I'm sure the interest rate is pretty low. But I'm just wondering about our equipment replacement fund, because I think that's keyed off of depreciation that we do now. Can you share a little bit with that?
Yes, we do have money in the, for the PD vehicles in that fund. That fund, just so that you know, is part of the total of our general fund. So if we take it out of there, it still comes out of the general fund.
We're not showing that. I thought we were showing that as a line item though. Almost like a savings account. No.
No. Oh, it is, it's broken out, but it's included in the total of our general fund balance.
It's kind of earmarked within the general fund.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
It's really part of your fund balance. So
I know.
if we utilize it, it would reduce our fund balance. You know, it's part of it. Like management partners, they identified that overall those funds they're set aside, and that's what they're intended for. But it would reduce general fund balance.
Yeah, Chief, the 15% that USDA would, could we purchase it now and then pay cash for it now and then get 15% out of them? No.
I don't believe it works that way. You have to submit at the grant cycle and then order the car. It all kind of ties in together.
Okay.
And it's a grant, right? So it's free money. It's not a loan. It's like a 15.
That is
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
All right.
And basically how that works is, and it would be inclusive to all the equipment, the console upgrades, the graphics and everything. And then at the end of that, they come in and they inspect the vehicle to ensure that you are within compliance of the grant. And so they will come inspect it and make sure. And once everything's good, they sign off on that. The unfortunate part of this is the way the grant cycle works, and that it would be much later into the year, setting us back quite a bit. But I do want to answer the other question, Mayor, that you asked about its ergonomics and the concern. You're going to have ups and downs and positive pros and cons in every single one of these that you do. California Highway Patrol uses Dodge Chargers. They have an enormous amount of those. Sonoma County Sheriff uses Dodge Chargers. A lot of organizations and the former agency I came from, we went to Dodge Chargers. You could certainly argue a very larger individual and their inability or struggles to get in and out of that car. But the patrol officers that we have here, they're not overwhelmingly large where I would feel that would be a concern. When I was at my former agency, 6'4" guy could get in and out of that car. So that there's pros and cons by everybody. A cost is certainly relative to this too.
And it sounds like we really need to do this now.
And how about
right? Is that to
we
avoid
really need to replace that. Again, it's really not just about mechanical issues, but it's also becoming a safety issue.
Yeah.
and response.
And really avoid that $3,000 to $4,000 repair. We don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Mayor, you had some.
How about the value of, I'm sorry, I wanted to follow up on the value of the old vehicle. Does it have any value?
You know, I mean, that's really hard to say. We wound up having to scrap one of the really bad vehicles before. We did recycle one of them that we felt was usable and gave it to Teresa, and we did it as a community service vehicle. So ideally, that would be great to do, but would it be able to be here as a backup in the event, for instance, to say I wanted to come out and work 4th of July, or we do utilize vehicles in that regard. And if it were capable of doing that, you know, we certainly would. But again, you're putting expense back into that to make that happen.
Well, it's almost like if we could drive it from intersection to intersection and just leave it sitting there empty, you know, up by the quick stop where the stop sign is. You put one of those things up there, I'm sure everybody's going to stop for that stop sign.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we can certainly look at
maybe
this.
a cardboard cutout with the chief holding the laser gun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Chief, you know, whatever you got to do, you know, if you want it sooner than later, that I'm sure we can find a way to do it. So.
And this item would have to come to council for approval. We wanted to bring it to subcommittee for your review, so there was no surprises, and ultimately a recommendation, so we could bring it forward to council.
Well, it sounds to me that fiscally, I mean, what I'm hearing is the recommendation is to really, you know, use those impact fees, and then what would we use all the, would you cover the whole thing with impact fees and finance part of it, or what would the structure be?
Well, if we move forward sooner rather than later, we would plan to purchase the vehicle using impact fees. I think that makes a lot of sense. The alternative is to finance it, in which case we would just, you know,
it just costs more in the long run if you finance it. So I mean, if we can't make it to the grant, I mean, and then what's, I guess, so to the grant cycle, so when is the next vehicle kind of up that might fit into the grant cycle that where we would be able to take advantage of it?
So we're looking at this as the most critical with mileage and length of time that they've been in service. So we would certainly look at one of those other, the Fords are all okay. We would be looking at another one of these Tahoes that have significant amount of mileage on it and be looking to do that in the grant.
Okay.
Would we be able to do that, start the grant process for the next fiscal year? If it doesn't start until March, then maybe whatever vehicle we're going to have in our next budget.
Yeah, so that's the point of that. You start doing the USDA now, and I'll be quite honest with you, it's done on this end. It would need to go to our representative and have him take a look at the language. If all looks good, it would go to finance. And once all that looks good, this would actually be for the purchase of the vehicle in the next fiscal year when their cycle starts. So that's where we would actually make this happen.
And if we're only financing 15%, we're talking 9,000. I mean,
No, they're only financing 15. You're
Right.
doing the other 85. Yeah.
Right, we're
That's
picking up
correct.
the 85 and getting
Yeah.
a grant for the 15.
yeah, so I'm sure we could dig around in our finances somewhere and come up with that $9,000. So,
Well, they're only paying $9,000. You're paying the difference.
I understand that.
Oh,
So
okay.
we should just buy it 100%, just buy it outright. We're not talking a lot of money here that we're financing. So let's just bite the bullet and buy it.
Yeah,
That's my vote.
I agree. So are we in agree, was that clear instruction? So for this, it sounds like for this purchase, for these purposes, for replacing this vehicle, utilizing impact fees, and then let's go ahead and get the ball rolling for the USDA grant for the next vehicle in the queue. We can always turn it down, right, Chief?
I'm sorry. I mean, there'd be no real, you know, I mean, it's not a big deal. It's
Yeah.
covering $8,000. If you don't want to do it, you don't do it.
Yeah, we just turn it down. Okay.
Yeah, and there's not an enormous amount of work involved in this, if I'm being honest. It's not
We're not losing a ton
typical
of
grant
man hours. Yeah.
So,
Okay. All right. Does that sound good? Is that some good direction? Are you in agreement, Mr. Mayor?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Let me get back to our, what is our next agenda item? What do we have next? I think we are talking server.
Computers.
We're talking server. All right. City manager.
Okay, so
I think the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get you a new microphone, David.
yeah, I'm not sure. Usually the iPad works good. I think it must be the broadband capacity here. I'm not
Probably.
sure.
Yeah, we need to put ourselves on mute so we don't interrupt you. So go ahead and we'll tug out our ear if we can't quite pick you up.
Well, and that's the existing servers that host our RIM system for our police department, as well as our police department file system, have reached their end of life. We have some really old servers that date back to 2008 and even 2003. It's critical that we upgrade those servers. The cost quote that we've received from our IT vendor is just right about $60,000. We think this is imperative that we upgrade our servers. We would also upgrade a number of our what are referred to as virtual servers that provide and host our data. So what we would like to do is bring forward a budget amendment to council, again using a combination of impact fees, city hall and police department fees. We did do a review of the Nexus study and determined that those items were covered in those fees, in the Nexus anyways, to go ahead and purchase the new replacement servers. Obviously, it's a big ticket item, and this came to our attention after the budget was developed and adopted, and we feel it's a critical item. We were asking for this subcommittee support to bring forward again the budget amendment to be able to purchase the new servers that host our RIM system, in particular for our police department, which is a critical safety function for our city.
And I actually just kind of had a couple of clarifying questions in light of the conversation earlier, where we were advised to maybe take some of our professional contracts out. I know that we've been with our particular service provider for a while, so this might be a good opportunity to look at some other possibilities. And the other concern that I had too was, given the state of City Hall and the police department, I mean, I realize that we now have very great backup power there, but I'm not convinced that even having a physical server is really necessary or is really the way to go, considering our earthquake vulnerability and some other the state of those two buildings and how they're somewhat vulnerable. So I just was wondering, have we put out, what are the possibilities of us going completely virtual? Is that possible with the RIM system and some of the other systems at the police department? So what state are you at as far as investigating, what the solution would look like?
Yeah, on the RIM system, I think, Chief, I'd have to defer back to you and the proprietor who provides us with the RIM software, whether it can be hosted completely virtual in the cloud without a host physical server or not. KLH was unable to answer that question relative to whether it could be in a cloud system or not. My sense from what they shared with me was that because of the nature of the way RIMS works, it would require a complete revamp in the way regional dispatch for other agencies, how they would access that data. Because we do have a T1 line to city police department.
We heard most of that. Okay.
Yeah, I copied a bit, but I think I tend to agree with David, but it is definitely a question for Sunridge Systems that we need to check into and find out, because I think if you didn't hear, we also support a switch for 5 other law enforcement organizations, and I don't know how that would work.
Right. Yeah, I think that we need to get that question answered first.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, did you have any questions?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I wonder if we could maybe just get that ironed out. You know, what are the possibilities also of putting the contract out to bid? Because just, you know, according to the previous presentation, I think we're overdue on that. And so it would be great if we could get some bids from a couple of different vendors. And if the, you know, 100% cloud-based system as possible, know what that number is going to be. If that's not possible, know what that number is going to be. And then we can actually bring some hard data and some hard costs to the council so that they can make that final decision.
Okay, we could certainly work on developing an RFP. If we do that in advance of purchasing a new server, it's going to put us out probably several months before we commence. Obviously, we'd have to go through that RFP process, review, bring back those proposals, and I just want to caution the subcommittee.
Bless you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
You're live.
we won't be able to bring this item forward for consideration until we go through that process. So I just want to make sure that there's a real risk in that, but you know, we can. What you're saying is hire an IT, consider additional proposals for an IT firm, bring them on to be able to evaluate what our alternatives are for the technology. There's a time delay.
Yeah.
And therefore, in the interim, if our server crashes, then we'll have impacts. So I just want to make sure that that decision is made fully aware that we could have significant IT impacts while this process is in process. That's just full disclosure.
I don't want to add to the confusion of this, but I need to echo what David says, is we have 5 other agencies that pay us annually for that switch and that service. It would be a great disservice to them if we lost the ability to provide them what they pay us for, and concerns from liability standpoints, because these are critical. RIMS is a very critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I understand that. My concern is that we will be getting not only the best cost for if we go direct with our current vendor, will we be getting not my concern isn't just financial. My concern is if we're going to be actually getting the technology that we need and going forward. That's my concern with that, without, and I don't know how to do that without sending it out to bid. That's the issue. Is there another alternative that would work with our time frame, city manager?
I'd have to evaluate that. If we'll have to, you know, really to satisfy the request, we'll have to work on an RFP. We may need to bring in some technical assistance to help us develop that RFP. So, because unfortunately we don't have we don't have staff on board that provide technology. But I know, Susie, we can reach out to our counterparts for RFP for an IT consultant, and we'll put the purchase on hold and go through that process. I think it usually takes about at least 30 days to develop an RFP. You want about another 30 days to ensure consultants have adequate time to prepare and respond. And then it's another 30 days to 60 days to bring forward an agreement and insurance and all that. So we'd be looking probably sometime maybe in March, to be able to bring forward a contract for an IT firm, and then we get a proposal from them at that point. Even KLH is identifying it's going to take them 8 weeks to complete the work. So it's just more time, but it's prudent to understand from a financial perspective to really look at our alternatives for IT systems. I don't know anything short of going through that RFP process and really evaluating the qualifications of the firms that the other option would be to try to get direct quotes for the product itself, but a big part of this is the labor. So
yeah, my understanding is that RIMS has to have a server. It cannot be in the cloud. You can have.
That's what I was concerned about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are services that are cloud-based that can maybe read RIMS and then and work together that way. But my understanding, I've been working with AWS, Amazon Web Services, trying to get them to quote us what it would cost to go virtual. And so I think if anything, we should probably at least continue with the RIMS server. I know that that's very, it's important, as Chief mentioned, that
that might be able, if the systems were a little bit more bifurcated, which I'm assuming they already are. So if you did move, more City Hall operations to Amazon's servers, or the other possibility would be Microsoft Azure servers. I would get 2 quotes from those and then look at just what you would need to support RIMS and the police department locally, because that's what we need. We need to get a real bid from a real IT company that will give us the real prices so that we can make informed choices. And that's what I want to see.
Madam Chair, I agree with you 100%. I do have another concern I do need to address.
Oh, go right ahead.
We are due for a RIMS update as we currently speak. Okay. We're unable to get that update because it's no longer supported in those model that we have.
Right, and that's what I'm concerned about, is that if we already have a legacy system that hasn't been upgraded, we need to have all that information ahead of time and make sure that we're doing it right the first time. Otherwise, it's just going to cost more, and it's
because we have RIPA coming very quickly.
And RIPA, that's the other system.
And we've got to be, so there is some urgency to this. I certainly understand the position. Mm-hmm. I'm just concerned for the updates that are due now and our inability to get them in RIPA right around the corner.
Yeah, but I guess you understand my concern of having everything be local and having it cost more, and then it turned out that we only needed to have, we could go smaller capacity on a server that would meet the RIMS and RIPA need, but it's redundant or more than we really need to pay for, when the balance of the of City Hall needs could be cloud-based, which would probably be. So that's what I'm concerned about. And
my
so
concern is just the length of time into getting this accomplished and our inability to update. That's it.
Right. I agree. So, so is there a way that, I'm certainly available for a special meeting if that needed to happen. I'm assuming the mayor would make time for that as well on this issue. Would that help, city manager?
Well, the direction is to do an RFP process to hire an IT consultant. That we're looking at about a 4-month process without support to purchase the upgrade because of the need to go to IT firm. It's just a time. It requires additional time, and there's risk with that. And I hear there's comfort in the risk. I don't know how. We would have to evaluate if there's any opportunities to speed up the process by which we get additional quotes and service. Maybe I'll call in. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, call in. That would be. Don't forget to put your iPad on mute. Yeah, I'm a little concerned on how to move forward, Mr. Mayor, because I understand that there are some time restraints, but clearly it's time to reassess the entire the entire setup.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and ideally, the way to do it is an RFP. But by the same token, from what I'm hearing, we can't wait that long.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how we could expedite this without going out for an RFP. And
So Susie, you're not hearing back from Amazon, or what's the problem with getting a quote on cloud-based systems for City Hall?
You know, I just met with them and talked to David about this, and he said, yes, he would like to meet with them too. I'm actually typing an email to him right now saying, where are you? what's going on? But yeah, it's going to require that we get together, and they'll probably have to come and look at our system and see what we have and what can be virtual and what's not. That's how I learned that he was under the impression that we had to have a virtual, we had to have a physical RIMS server.
Yeah.
That one could not be virtual.
That makes sense. I mean, and that was one of my questions as well. So, okay.
so let's make ourselves available for a special meeting.
I think that's the way to do it. If we can get David back in here.
Because I think we'll probably postpone or cancel the November meeting based on the fact that it's going to be November the 3rd. But
yeah,
next week, the week after, I'll make myself available for a meeting.
Yeah, me too. Does that sound good, Susie? Since things think we've lost David.
Yes, we can. I know David would make that work, and I certainly will. And Chief and Kevin.
Chief, are you okay with that as well? I mean, I think we're moving faster than putting it out on an RFP.
Right. Yeah.
At this point.
I'll be open for the meeting, whatever we need to do.
Okay. That sounds good. All right. So let's move on to standing items, and who wants to take item A? Do we have any, let's do it this way. Do we have any updates on our standing items?
Thank you. That's a good way to do it.
Sorry, I have to get back to the agenda.
So do we have maybe something on B, update on Sonoma County COVID-19 education, more than likely? Maybe
Sorry,
not.
and I'm trying to get David back in here.
Okay.
I don't know, we're doing pretty well without him. No. He saw that, I'm never gonna live that down. Let's see. Do we have anything, actually, Kevin, do you wanna take an update on the homeless?
We don't have much.
Response?
We did learn yesterday that the county, and I think David sent an email out to this effect, that the county cleared out the area by Alexander Valley, and there was some, concern.
Healdsburg,
Yeah, that they might move this way. There's no real, evidence that would happen, but it was just kind of a heads up from the city of Healdsburg. And I know we just cleared out the geysers with the help of Mendocino County, so that could easily get repopulated. So we'll keep an eye on it. We were having our series of meetings that were going fairly well, I thought, but obviously due to COVID, we're not doing those. I thought about, I was kind of wondering how that would work virtually, but it'd be a lot of people. Mr. Mayor, you were there, and a lot of yelling and a lot of people. So I'm not sure how that would play out. But I guess the big update was the clear out at Alexander Valley and the potential for folks moving in. Chief, I don't know if you've heard any updates on homeless in the square. It's kind of status quo, it looks like.
We just have the couple. You're talking about the plaza?
Yeah.
Yeah, just the couple that seem to be regulars there that we're trying to address.
Okay. Great. What about item E, update on St. Joseph's Community Recovery? Have we heard anything?
What is it? So included in the packet was the webinar sent in by Miss Becky Enos. And then I do have both Amanda and then another person from the, I believe
Yes,
it's
I
the
think, oh,
healthcare.
and I'm sorry, I was not paying attention. It looks like we have some hands up. Amanda, did you have an update for us on that grant status?
I was just looking over the packet, and I did notice that that the letter of interest that we submitted by July 31st, we got that in. And then the next course of action on that request was that if we were, the request for partnership is expected to be made available by August 2020, which date has passed. And that if our letter of interest had been accepted, I think we would have been notified by that date. So I think this can be removed from the agenda.
Okay. I guess
Unless David gets any contact from them that we didn't know.
Amanda,
Yes.
hi, it's Becky. Sorry. Yeah, no, the letter of interest was not accepted by St. Joseph's.
Okay.
There we go.
So
That's
I didn't hear a final word. So okay, thank you.
David did get an email. Yeah, sorry. I think he shared it with a small group.
yes, on that one.
Yeah. Is David trying to talk?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Oh, I said, yeah, I did send out an email correspondence that we received from St. Joseph's, just indicating it didn't provide a basis for why it wasn't funded. It just said it wasn't funded this particular round.
Not funded this time. Well, we'll try again. So moving on to, is there anything else as item G, the pension liability legislation? We heard any news?
No.
Nope. Okay. I'll swing back to the top of the list for you, David, later. So we'll just finish it. Utility tax measure, is there an update?
Melanie,
Yes.
sorry. I'm driving. I apologize for interrupting. It's really poor decorum. I wanted to update the group though on the, I don't know what item it was on standing, but it was also the resilience and self-healing communities. Maybe, is that still an item on the standing agenda?
Let's see.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Since you're driving, why don't you go ahead and give us that? We're gonna take a shotgun approach.
Okay. I apologize. I did want to just ensure that the subcommittee was aware that we did get the webinars scheduled for Laura Porter of ACES Interface. And just to recap, this was some measures that I had taken and some action that I had taken with a smaller group of Health Action Committee folks to answer some of the questions that I know that both yourself and the mayor had put forward, and how to use the self-healing communities framework specifically during this time of COVID, and also, you know, in policy and decision making to make sure we're addressing that we're not providing redundant services in the community. And so there is one tomorrow, and there is one October the 15th. And that is one that I'm facilitating, and specifically geared towards folks like yourselves. But of course, anyone with the decision and policy-making abilities and how to use that. And I think it struck me and reminded me again in the Resilient Cloverdale call earlier this afternoon, you know, Daniel mentioned about his need to kind of step back for a little bit and wanting to pursue working with the group in the future around what it really does mean to look resilient in the long term. And I just want to connect dots here for folks that this particular webinar on October 15th really does speak to what Daniel was talking about this afternoon. And I do hope that folks can make some time in their calendar for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. And I wonder if we could also make a note. So are those webinars going to be recorded?
We're working on it. We did the first one. We were not able to record for whatever the reason, but we are going to hopefully make that available.
Yeah, that would be a great thing to possibly incorporate into our governance manual and our online resources for citizens as well as council members and staff. So
Absolutely, and I'm more than happy to send the email out again with the link. It is a little confusing. It's an Eventbrite invitation, and so then you have to accept the Eventbrite invitation, and then you would receive the Zoom link to
Okay.
attend.
Yeah, I think I got it, but it wouldn't hurt to send it again.
Not a problem.
Do you know what time that is, Becky, offhand?
It's in the morning, Mr. Mayor. I want to say it's like 10:30, something in that ballpark.
Okay. I'll look
Great.
for that email again. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be
You're
helpful.
welcome.
It's been kind of a
Thank you.
hectic couple of weeks, so yeah, getting to the top of our inbox probably helps.
Absolutely, no problem. I understand completely.
Great, thank you. All right. Anything else under standing items that we need to cover that's sticking out to staff or that an attendee has come to talk about?
Madam Chair,
Oh,
Go ahead.
I just looked up on the flyer for the webinar. It's 10 to 10:30 on October 15th.
Oh, great, thank you. There we go. Yeah, anything on the local preference policy or updating the governance manual?
Irene, can you provide an update to the subcommittee regarding your memo about the governance manual?
Of course. So at the last subcommittee meeting, it was just basically discussed to kind of go to staff and review what sections needed to be updated or recommendations. So staff did just that. And after reviewing in the memo, it just identifies certain sections that should be updated or added. You know, one of the, and just hearing back from the subcommittee as well. So one of the items is, you know, adding a mission statement. And I know previously we discussed having a workshop come January, and that's usually when most councils hold workshops and retreats, and it's a good time to focus also on their vision and values and mission statements. So then once that's done, it can be incorporated into the manual. Another area or many sections is really just expanding on the details of the different sections, like the introduction and purpose, the form of government, role of council, adding subsections, you know, duties and privileges of the members and governance at city meetings, and then additional items such as the required trainings that council is supposed to take every couple years, and then adding certain sections on social media, website links. Just, it's basically, it's supposed to be, you know, a handbook and guide that is transparent to the public, as well as also a guide for staff and the council. And some of them, you know, some of the updates may actually require council to, for council to approve them, so they can be incorporated in the manual. One example would be if, you know, the council chose to expand the current resolution, which only states time and place of meetings, if we wanted to add additional language to identify, you know, what happens with emergency meetings and postings and kind of the order of business when building an agenda, or if we wanted to set like a hard time to adjourn a meeting, you know, that we don't want to go till 2 a.m., then we would have to bring that resolution back to council. And then once it's approved with the new language, then of course it would be incorporated into the manual that way. So really, these were just some, you know, examples. We don't need to address them all at once, obviously, because it's a phased approach, but really just cherry pick, I'd say, a few of the sections that the subcommittee would like to prioritize and then continue that way. And because it is a starting point, as we work through the updates, I believe that, you know, we'll find more areas that we need to include or update.
Would it be best for us to get that back to you just via email?
Yes,
for
absolutely.
each of us? Okay,
yeah,
great. Put that on your homework list, Gus.
Got it.
All right.
Can we just back up
Sure.
to number to the
Maybe
Measure
11.
P, Measure
Sure.
P,
Sure.
the collection. Susie, just real quick in a couple words, I noticed September is down pretty good, pretty significantly. Any particular reason? Am I looking at it wrong?
Yeah, September is actually someone who paid early because September's is not due until October 31st.
October. Okay.
So, yeah, but if you look in August, that's where you'll find it. Also, just so that it's very transparent, there is one business that is past due, and the known past due amount is listed there at the bottom.
That's a pretty significant amount.
Yeah.
That's one business.
Yes,
Okay. But the reports are at least being submitted?
they are, and we're working. I'm continuing to work, trying to get them to pay. So.
Okay. Well, I think at some point, how many months has that been accumulating? You know offhand?
October 1st made it 3 months.
3 months, okay.
And I do have legal consultation scheduled.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Anything else in that group, Gus, that you wanted to?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, then I believe we will move on to future agenda items. And underneath that, we have, I don't know, maybe it should be a standing, I can never get this straight. Maybe it should be a standing item, but I know at the last meeting I'd asked about, what are some financing options, even if it were on a per neighborhood basis. Did we find out anything, Kevin or David, about that?
We haven't, but we have had some discussions with the Baumgartner Ranch regarding a community facilities district, so that they are open to the idea. We did have a pretty good meeting, I thought, with our consultants and the developer, and we're pursuing that. So that's one area that, and it could be expanded to include other areas as well. So I guess that would be the update in terms of street funding.
Great, let's stay on it.
How
It's not going away. Sorry, Gus, go ahead.
That's okay. The tax measure, I believe it's DD, where we're going to get
Yes.
150,000.
Well, it's just a continuation of the current tax. Yeah.
Well, I think I'd like to maybe look into the possibility of bonding against that. I don't know how long down the road we do that, but we're going to piggy bank this money until we have enough to do a project, or maybe we could bond against it. I don't know what's the best alternative.
No,
But,
I agree, Gus. I mean, yeah, I guess we'll know after November, but we're at that point where something's got to give.
Yeah, and that came up at the candidates forum the other night, or last night with the league, and nobody has an answer to this. The political rhetoric out there is nobody wants to raise taxes, and some of the new candidates. Well, I'm not going to get into that, but
I think it's a good idea. I think we might want to stay on the agenda.
But we really need to figure a way to leverage what we have coming in and how we do this.
Yeah, giving up and saying that's not an option. So we have to figure that out. So did you have any thoughts on that, David or Kevin, as far as like our
we do a citywide bond. I don't know.
Well, that's something we can certainly assess, is the ability for us to bond against those future revenue sources. I think, Mayor, what you're referring to primarily is our SB1 fund that we've been banking to support the 4th Street reconstruction project.
Well, we've got our
SB1
SB1 funds, but we also have right now the Measure M funds that we get from the quarter-cent sales tax. So if DD passes, we would have that as well.
Right. It would have to determine, can you bond against two separate funding sources?
Or two together funding sources. Yeah.
To generate the capital necessary now to undertake a larger project. I think that's, if I understand council or mayor and chair, what you're asking for is the ability to fund projects now and then use future revenues to offset the debt service for those bond funds that we would use to be able to fund the project up front.
Does that sound good?
That's
Bess?
exactly what I'm asking. Yes, that's what I'm looking for. So.
Yeah, and I guess it's like I want an array of possibilities. It's kind of, if that's possible as well.
Yeah, there's two alternatives: pay as you go, or debt service through bonding, and we can certainly try to do some forecasts based on what we receive for SB1 funds, as well as what we may receive in terms of Measure M funds, to kind of give a perspective on how much we would expect to accumulate over a period of time, and what that looks like in relationship to doing, a capital improvement project and what the cost of that might be. Just kind of the basic numbers for both of those. We may need to attach some professional consulting to help us with, what's our financing capability, what's the respective interest rates for the type of funding vehicle we would use. We have to do that in the context of Prop 218, whether it requires, voter approval or not, if we're going to do some kind of GO bond, or whether there's a specific, funding vehicle that is specific to those SB1 funds and Measure M funds. I'm not aware of any cities that have bonded against Measure M, but if it's readopted, that may change. But there has been, I think, some interest statewide of bonding against SB1 funds. So there may be some programs we can look at in that avenue that might be available to the city.
I know that's been talked about at SCTA, and I just can't remember what the details were, or if pre-COVID cities were talking about bonding on the renewal. So we can probably find out if anybody's done any research on that locally, and how far they got. Yeah.
Well, I mean, realistically, we don't even take care of the streets we have now. I know a couple of years ago, we sealed North Cloverdale Boulevard because it was the newest street we had and we wanted to preserve it. Even if we took that $150,000 a year that we get in and did preventive maintenance on the good streets, if we tried to go out with a bond initiative, the folks that live in the good neighborhoods would probably never support it. So it's almost like, let's take care of what we have that's in good condition now. So I don't know.
Any other future agenda items? And the pending item is we're discussing canceling the regular meeting for November. Does that work for you, Mr. Mayor? And then it sounds like we need to schedule a special meeting to discuss the server issue, and we'll just be available for staff to schedule that. Anything else for good of the order?
Nothing from me, Madam Chair.
All right, well, if that's the case, then we will adjourn to our next meeting, which is to be determined sometime in, will that be in the new year, Irene, or will that be in December?
No, the next regular skipping November will be December.
It'll be in December. All right. Yes. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff. Great work today, and look forward to getting together again soon on this other item. All right, everybody, have a great afternoon, and we'll